enormous risks with not a lot of tangible benefits. And I think the European political elite really understands that the stakes, it would undo decades worth of progress in European integration, European politics. And I think they're really they'll do their utmost to prevent that from happening.
Well, I never. Fat Fingers strikes again. Sorry about that, listeners. You probably heard a little cock up. That was my fault. The fault of my fat fingers from all of the finger food. I've cracked that joke three times now. Look, I've got a couple of text messages. One of them says here, in between the documentaries Inside Job and the more radical Zeitgeist series, I wonder if we're seeing the beginning of the end of capitalism. So if you want to send a text like the texter did there, you can do that on 5395. It costs 20 cents. Or you can email the studio at 95bfm.com. Or you can give us a call like Glenn and Brendan have done on 309 3879. The time is now 36 minutes past the hour of 12 o'clock, which means it's time for Mr. Selwyn Manning.
Oh, here he comes! Hey. Minister! How are you? Minister! Answer! Well, how's your wife? Answer the question, Minister!
Counter-Clockwise, thanks to scoop.co.nz.
Hello, Selwyn.
Yeah, g'day, John. How are things?
Good. Should probably tell them that you're not from scoop.co.nz anymore. Was it live news?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, I'm not lingering on at Scoop. I left there in the end of the election campaign, I think it was.
We need to update that sting, I think.
Still got a very good relationship with Scoop. But, we're representing livenews.co.nz at the moment. It's a project we're trying to kick off, and it's worth checking out.
Well, I'm signed up. Hey, so this week we are going to talk about what's probably a bit ubiquitous in the press, or at least at the top of the hour on news organisations, and that's the Urewera 4. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's obviously, as just about every listener would be able to testify to, it's been a long time coming. The Urewera, terror raids that occurred back in 2007 certainly have dwindled down. In my view, John, I suppose this whole thing is about scale. It was the scale of the raids, the scale of the operation, in my view, that was problematic right from the start. Now, clearly, you and I are coming from today a position of great advantage from this hindsight kind of position, and from what the police have presented in the courts this week, with their surveillance videos and their audio recordings of what was taking place in the Urewera forest and the bush around, you can see why they would have investigated further. It would be very churlish to say that the police should not have investigated to find out whether or not there was something going awry.
Yeah.
But this case, put simply, is an opportunity for the remaining 4 to present their defence. And I think, it's obviously in the process of doing that, and we need to respect the courts and respect the ideals of justice to kind of let that defence be presented and to see what the jury actually makes of that. That said, clearly, once again, this whole thing was a situation of scale. There were around 300 armed police officers that took part in those dawn raids back in September in 2007, all over the North Island, different areas. But it wasn't just, the initial accused that were dragged out of their early slumber that morning. It was also the elderly in their communities. There were women of all ages, and most significantly and most concerningly, children, of all ages, right down to toddlers. Now, they were all lined up on that day with police pointing loaded guns at their chests. And, that morning, as you can see from the footage like the documentary Operation 8, for example, that's footage that was occurring on that day, you can see that the kids, and I'm focusing on that, were considered as potential accomplices in what the police believed could have been at that time an advanced terror cell network. Now, that was terrifying, and my concerns, John, I suppose, is about the scale of the severity of that operation, and from a hindsight position, albeit, but the terrifying kind of effect that had on the communities, particularly those in Tūhoe country, and in my mind, the justification for that kind of scale of operation it was basically a preemptive defensive operation by the state, it has not stacked up. We've seen, it's scaled back over the last few years, John.
Just to clarify, because I obviously wasn't in the country when this went down, and there's going to be a lot of people who might not remember what happened. When you say that they were pointing guns at kids, I mean, are we talking about teenagers? Are we talking about pre-teenagers? I mean,
what happened in the Dawn raid is it was obviously a surprise operation. That suspects in different centres around the country, but particularly in Rotoki, down in the Urewera areas, were woken up in their beds in an early morning pre-dawn kind of raid. That everybody in the households or the dwelling houses where the people were, where the accused were believed to be, were marshalled out and put, isolated, and made sure that they were not able to resist in any way that would cause or affect the outgoing, the ongoing part of that operation. They were then questioned. There were armed police all around with their live firearms, and little kids, right down to toddlers, of course, were in many of these houses, particularly in Rotoki. And we're in the midst of all of this type of thing. It seemed like there was an awful lot of surveillance, an awful lot of police intelligence that went on prior to that raid, obviously. And from, once again, I mention it's a hindsight position. And maybe the listeners have got a view on that. But it seemed to me that intelligence that the police were privy to at that time would have shown exactly what kind of families they were dealing with in the broader communities. You've got to remember that whole town down there in the Ureweras was basically sealed off. And helicopters above with snipers leaning out the helicopters. The whole thing was like some sort of thing out of Apocalypse Now. And when you look at it in the light of day, out of the overt, should I say, the covert suspicion kind of culture that was obviously around in the early to the mid-late 2000s on such things. In the light of day today, what have we seen? We've seen that the Terrorism Suppression Act, which required, those who were going to be accused to have demonstrated planning a terrorist act, or the other part of the the test is making a credible threat to carry out some sort of terrorist act. Those tests were not met once the Solicitor General had a good look at them. Then we saw that they were people were charged with firearms, unlawful possession of firearms charges. Many of those, we're looking at 12, 13 people dropped off those charges as well, and the charges taken away. Remaining 4 people face firearms charges and, allegedly taking part in a organised criminal group, which is the more serious, obviously, of the two things. But at the same time, is a long way short of a terrorism charge. So you've got to wonder, what was really going on? Were the police at the time testing out this new, at the time it was a new Terrorism Suppression Act, or were they just acting in a way that was really over the top and like we've let in on this particular thing, terribly frightening for many victims, and I say victims because they were clearly innocent, and I mean the children and many of the elderly.
It puts me in mind of the Kim.com thing, the over heavy-handedness, and then that leads me to start thinking, well, here we have New Zealand sort of forces, if you like, not forces, but the powers that be, sending a message not just to their own citizens, but to the rest of the world. We're taking this threat seriously. So you've got the threat of copyright infringement and the threat of terrorism, when in actual fact it just seemed to be a bunch of, obviously there's probably a lot more to it, and I'm not as in the know, but there seemed to be a bunch of people playing army men, really. That's what it looks like. What do you make of the footage that they've shown in the trial?
Well, put it this way, all over, I'm not trying to make light of that. The case is going on. It'll be up to the jury, to make a rational and reasonably minded decision on what they're seeing there and what they're hearing from both sides. I think we need to bear in mind, what they were originally charged with. We also can see from what the way the Crown is presenting its evidence in court this week, that there is a certain amount, I believe, in my opinion, of face saving going on. That they are really packaging it in a way that you would expect the evidence to have been presented should the prima facie case of Terrorism Suppression Act have been maintained. So they're obviously going for broke on this, and that's the police's prerogative, and obviously the public interest is, attached to the police's motivations there. But at the end of the day, I think we need to remind ourselves that these four are not up on terrorism charges. They are up on, these alleged unlawful possession of firearms charges and also taking part in some sort of criminal group. Now, at the end of the day, many have said that the degree of potential offence relating to those charges, and it would be up to the judge, should things go that way, would be a minimal kind of reprimand. Well, so it's interesting that millions of dollars have been spent on this whole operation, and really has the public interest been looked after in that respect.
It's kind of, again, just to take a side issue, but there must be quite a lot of cases that come up in the courts where you've got people who are guilty, or at least allegedly guilty, of firearms offences who are members of criminal organisations, i.e. gangsters. I mean, that must come up all the time.
Well, it did this week. We saw in the New Zealand Herald reports yesterday, for example, of a mongrel mob power play that had gone wrong down in Wairau on the East Coast, where gunshots were people were shooting guns. One mobster copped a shotgun blast to the face and died later from an aneurysm that the autopsy said was unrelated to the shotgun blast to the face, which seems remarkable. But those guys, they many of those that were waiting sentencing this week went down for 5-7 years, I think it was, at the maximum, and 3 at the minimum. But you can see that what they were doing, their charges were being involved in a criminal group as well. You can see their charges, they actually were out there shooting and trying to actually do each other in, by the sound of it. So this is something quite different here. I think the definitions of the criminal group that the Crown is actually laying out is where we need to focus on, and to hear what the defence is. And the conclusion of the court, wait for the jury's verdict on that. It'll be interesting. I mean, just take us back in brief as we exit probably this, this edition, John, is the Solicitor General David Collins sitting down with the Law Commissioner, Deputy President Warren Young, and also High Court Judge Justice Randerson, and they were discussing this, and this is in Operation 8, the documentary. Young says, for example, they certainly talked about the possibility of killing people, assassinating the Prime Minister, taking action against George Bush, but those were all expressed in extravagant and vague language. There was no evidence of any planning at all. Then the Solicitor General David Collins replies, there is reference made to talk of assassinating President Bush. How was that to be achieved in the minds of those whose conversations were being intercepted? So that's the question. Young replies, as I recall, by catapulting a bus onto George Bush's head. And so this is the type of conversations that these legal minds at the top of their game singled out to test whether or not there was a credible threat in play here. And on the basis of that, it appears that that they advised and then dropped the terrorism charges and reduced them down to this.
On the basis of that, it sounds like someone was having a laugh, really. We're going to catapult a bus onto the head of George Bush.
Well, I suppose if we're in a certain kind of group, we get carried away in our conversations, and we don't know that someone is listening in a different kind of frame of mind. I suppose all of us could be embarrassed when these things make the light of day, and it may be that that's the case here, or it may not be. Let's wait and see.
Right, well, look, Selwyn, once again, enlightening as always. We will speak again next week.
Okay,
God willing.
John.
All right, my friend, have a great week.
You too. Take care.
Bye. All right, that was Selwyn Manning there with Counter-Clockwise. It is now 49 minutes past 12.